Thanks, James. Well, some of you may have been, I've given similar talks like this before. Some of you may have been there. So hopefully I got some new material stuff, some new stuff, keep you entertained and educate you a little bit. I've talked before about controlling pests with biopesticides, and there's a lot of potential biopesticides out there. Ones that control insects, ones that control nematodes, ones that control different diseases, bacteria, fungal diseases, some with a lot of potential. But what I wanted to concentrate on today is more practical. So I'm going to talk about the Bacillus group. The Bacillus is a bacterium. And these are ones that the material's out there. It's available. You can buy it, you can use it, and it's effective. And so, if you haven't used biopesticides before, I want to encourage you to at least think about it. And if you're paying any attention to society and the way things are going right now, if you haven't used biopesticides before, at some point, they're probably going to make you start using biopesticides because all the chemicals are going to be off the market and you're not going to be able to get them anyway. Hopefully I'll give you a little bit of an idea of what is currently, some of the things that are currently available, and get you interested. If you aren't, if you're already using it, great. Maybe you can tell us how well it worked for you at the end of the talk. So there's three classes of biopesticides as defined by the EPA. And the one that we're looking at is microbial biopesticides. That's where the Bacillus group comes into. And they just simply define that as one that uses the bacterium, the fungus, virus, protozoan, anything like that that's alive is the active ingredient. So in that case, active actually has two meanings. It's the one that does the job and it's a living organism. So the Bacillus fits into the class 2 of the biopesticides. And the class 3, that one's controversial in a lot of areas. But Bacillus also gets involved in that one because a lot of times they take the genes from the microorganisms that are in class 2 and put those into the plants and create the class 3 type. So Bacillus thuringiensis, so we'll start with that one because that's one I'm sure everyone's familiar with. It's been around a long time, as you'll see as we go into this. And one thing about most of these, or all of these Bacillus is they fit into, they are common. Very common. It's not some exotic species that was discovered and we're suddenly growing it in the lab and spreading it all over the environment. The Bacillus, especially the thuringiensis, it's a common soil-dwelling bacteria. They find it in the gut of caterpillars, moths, butterflies. You can find it on leaf surfaces. You can see all the places they found it. Aquatic environments, in animal feces, wherever there's insects, even in flour mills and grain storage facilities. And of course, if it's in a flour mill or a grain storage facility, it's probably because they ground up some insects while they were grinding up the grains and it ended up in there. But it is a gram-positive, rod-shaped, flagellated bacterium, so it swims around, moves around on its own. I think it's always fun to put these up because most of the time, this is the only time you're ever going to see a Bacillus that looks like that. Most of us don't have access to scanning electron microscopes, and even if we do, we're probably not going to be looking at the bacterium underneath it. So these are fun just to give you an idea of what the little guy looks like. And this is a drawing of it. You can see all the different parts of it. And the Bacillus goes through a sporulation phase, and in this one they have the endospore here, and then they also have the endotoxins forming. A lot of times the genes for those endotoxins are on plasmids, which are extra chromosomal material that the bacterium actually pass back and forth between each other sometimes. But with the history of the Bacillus thuringiensis, it was first discovered, as you can see, a long time ago, 1901, by a Japanese biologist in a grain silo. And then it was rediscovered in 1911 by a German scientist, Ernst Berliner, and that was, he discovered it in a disease of flower moth caterpillars. But it first became commercially available as an insecticide in France in 1938. So it's been around a long time. And in the 1950s is when it became available in the U.S. So, what is Bacillus thuringiensis again? Here we have these are the endospores, and this is the bacterium going through the sporulation phase. And here you can see the spore that it's forming. That is a reproductive and a spore that can help it survive harsh conditions. So it has a way of surviving. And this is the endospore, or the toxin crystal being formed inside of it. It's a proteinaceous crystal. And the BT that we have is actually a group of Bacillus subspecies, and the delta endotoxin is what all of them produce. These are coded for on the gene, they call them cry genes. There are also now some other names for different type of genes because they found lots and lots and lots of proteinaceous toxins being produced by these different Bacillus thuringiensis species and subspecies. But with the cry genes themselves, there are over 700 sequences that have been identified that produce these crystalline endotoxins. And they are called protoxins because in reality, when it's in that crystalline form, it's not toxic at all. So they're totally inactive until the insect eats them and gets it inside of it. So until the insect eats that toxin, it's just a crystal and has no toxic effect whatsoever. So the mode of action of the crystalline toxin, well, here's the spore and the toxin, which you'll find in, this is what the commercially available material has in it. It has the toxins and the spores. The caterpillar eats it, and once it goes in, the pH in the caterpillar's gut is very different from the pH in our guts. In the case of the lepidopteran insects, moths, butterflies, all those, they have a very alkaline gut. And once it goes in, the alkaline conditions dissolves the crystals and allows them to open up and relax. And when it does that, the insect actually, in its genes, has the genes for producing proteases. These proteases then digest the protoxin, which is inactive, and when these proteins, these enzymes produced by the insect's gut, cleaves the inactive toxin, it makes it active. So the insect is killing itself because of the proteases that it has in its gut. And once the toxin becomes active, it intercalates into the epithelial cells of the insect's gut, and it creates a channel. So essentially, the insect starts to bleed to death on the inside. Essentially, you can say it spills its guts and dies. That's what happens to the insect. And once the toxin is cleaved and becomes active, it's impermeable or impervious to any other protease activity. So it's not going to be cleaved again, and once the insect has it inside, there's nothing that you can do, the insect can do to save itself. It's done for. But there's also inside the spores. Remember, they're attached up here, or in the same mix, not necessarily attached. And so then the spores germinate and the bacterium proliferates. So there it is in the soil, living, going on, doing its thing, so the bacterium reproduces itself inside the insect. And so there's a lot going on in there, but that is essentially the mode of action of the BT toxin protein. Ingestion of the crystals, activation of the toxin, and then the creation of ion channels, which leads to dehydration, bacteremia, and death. The only thing about it is a slow death. it can take from 1 to 5 days for the insect to die once it eats the protein, but it stops eating. So it essentially is dying and starving to death. So that's what kills it. One of the bad things about the toxin is it's very sensitive to UV light, which will break it down. And when you spray it on your plants, it can wash off. So that is one of the problems with it. But as you'll see in a little bit, they have worked to solve that. But the BT family, like I said, there are multiple subspecies of the Thuringiensis. And some of them are BT israelensis, and that one, the toxins are very specific for insects in the family, the Dipter family, and like mosquitoes, flies, and gnats, as you can see over here. And then there's BT aizawi and Kerstaki. These are also subspecies of the Thuringiensis, and they are active against the caterpillars of moths and butterflies, or the Lepidopteran family. I'm sure all of us recognize this guy. And then there's BT tenebrianus, BT japonensis, and BT San Diego, and those are all effective against beetle larvae. So in the BT family, you can see there's a lot of specificity to what you can get. So that's a good thing and a bad thing. A lot of us like to use broad spectrum pesticides, so we can go in there and figure out whatever the problem is. I'm not sure what it is sometimes. Take the shotgun approach, just wipe out everything. Well, that in itself is becoming less and less of a viable option for us, and especially if you're concerned with the environment. So you see there's a lot of specificity here. So you can actually, rather than going hunting with a shotgun, you can go hunting with a rifle and take out exactly what you want. And currently, BT is found in over 130 registered pesticide products, so there are a lot of products out there. These are environmentally safe, environmentally friendly, non-toxic to mammals, birds, fish, all those guys, only specifically to the insects and the insect family that particular isolate is effective, the toxins are effective against. And I talked to you about its lability and UV light washing off. Well, most of the BT formulations now, they contain surfactants and stickers, so when you spray it on, it spreads, and it's designed to stick and not wash off easily. And they also, most of them contain an agent that protects those spores and the crystals from UV light. So you get a lot longer residual activity now with the BT, as opposed to when they first started using it back 50 years ago. Wow, 70 years ago, I'm getting old. So, what are some pros and cons of the BT? So the advantages compared to other commonly used insecticides, the products, non-toxic, like I said, people, pets, wildlife, other organisms closely related to the target pest, beneficial insects, the pollinators. None of those are going to be affected by the BT. And there are different strains of the bacterium, which are very specific for different families of insects, and so you can really target the pests that you're after. And most BT formulations, if you're doing food crops, you can spray and harvest right away. You don't have to be concerned about waiting for an extended period of time before you harvest, or even re-entries. The re-entry intervals are 0. So that's another advantage to it. Some of the disadvantages, sunlight degrades it, like I mentioned earlier. If they don't put those UV protectants in, a week or less. They've actually done some studies where spraying it on under the right conditions, if you spray the toxins on, within an hour, they have been dissociated by UV light. But they use protectants in the formulations now to stop that. Another disadvantage, but we've all gotten used to this, contact insecticides in the same way. The insect has to eat it in order to be killed. So good coverage is essential. Any ones that ever used even the chemical contact insecticides know good coverage is essential. BT is not systemic, in other words. So you would treat it like any other contact pesticide. You have to get good coverage. Again, I mentioned this earlier, it doesn't kill right away. So you go out there and spray with pyrethrins, Heck, you can see them flying through the air. You spray something with pyrethrum, it drops like that. It's gone. Well, you're not going to get that with BT, but you rely on the fact that you know it's going to happen. It's like spraying weeds with glyphosate. You spray them in the morning, and you look at them the next morning, and you think they look great, but you know that that's been taken in by the plant, and there's nothing that the plant can do to save itself. 3 days later, 4 days later, it's dead. Same thing's going to happen when you use BT on your insects. But they do have a shorter shelf life. So they have to be stored properly. They are living organisms. So too hot, too cold, they don't like that. They say it has a shorter shelf life, but most of us, it says reduce effectiveness after 2 to 3 years of storage. Most of us, in the business especially, there's not many things that you're going to store and have for that long. So having a shorter shelf life as a professional, if you get 2 to 3 years shelf life out of it, you're doing really good. So move from Bacillus thuringiensis, the one that some people maybe have heard of in the medical field before, but it's also as a plant pesticide. Bacillus subtilis. That's what it looks like under the microscope. When you apply this to the seeds, it colonizes the plant and the plant's roots as it grows. So it develops and grows along with the plant. And once it's on the plant's roots, it just tends to grow, proliferate, and stay on the plant's roots. It's been shown to control rhizoctonia, aspergillus, fusarium, those diseases. It helps to suppress them. When you apply it to the leaves, it controls multiple fungal and bacterial diseases. And you can use the product as a root drench. So after you planted, even plants that you install and got your full root system, you just drench them with the product. This is the most common product out there that uses Bacillus subtilis. It's going to invade essentially the roots, colonize the roots, and still protect the plants. So it's easy to apply, easy to get onto the plants. And just to give you an idea of how it controls, this is just one excerpt from the cease label, the product label. This one's for ornamentals, flowering, deciduous. You can see all the different things that it can. This one you apply it to as a soil drench, or this is actually being used as a soil drench. You see, controls rhizoctonia, pythium, fusarium, and phytophthora. That little guy that Raj was talking about earlier. It has been shown to suppress those different diseases, and this is using as a root drench. You see, it goes all the way from edibles to ornamentals. This is just one small section of what they have shown it to be effective against. The Bacillus subtilis mode of action, well, it actually has two different modes of action. It has a direct mode of action and an indirect mode of action. The direct mechanism, it produces secondary metabolites, hormones, cell wall degrading enzymes, antioxidants that have a direct effect on the pathogen itself. And that works in two ways. It can actually kill the pathogen, or it can weaken the pathogen. If it weakens the pathogen, that helps the plant using its own defense system to resist attack by the pathogen. So this is the direct mechanism for the mode of action. The indirect, it stimulates plant growth. And something that I've talked about before, some of you may have heard of it, the induction of the acquired systemic resistance. That's when an organism is growing on a plant. It doesn't cause disease, but what it does, it causes the plant to turn on its resistance genes and turn on its mechanism to resist the pathogens. So it's similar to us getting vaccinations. That's essentially what happens to us when we get a vaccination. We're getting the organism, or a weakened version of the organism, injected into our bodies. Our bodies react and start to build up everything it needs to resist the pathogen if we come in contact with a very live virulent pathogen. Well, that's the same thing with Bacillus subtilis and some other biopesticides do is they turn on the plant's defense system. So the plant's sitting there with its guns loaded, ready for attack by the pathogen, so it can resist it. It also helps to nourish the plant, to make the plant healthier, because it can solubilize the soil phosphorus, making it more available. It helps to enhance nitrogen fixation. It produces siderophores. Siderophores are compounds that actually go out and specifically bring in different nutrients, compounds. One of them actually will take in iron and help the plant to get iron better. Also, the fact that the siderophores are there taking in the iron, making it available to the plant, it's less available to any pathogens in the soil, so it helps to reduce the effectiveness of those pathogens because it's stopping the pathogens from getting the iron. And here again, like I mentioned, it produces, the acquired systemic resistance. It helps the plants to handle stress better because they're growing better. Turns on their stress response genes, all these different stress-related metabolites. And now the third one, this is one probably a lot of you have not heard of as much, Bacillus amyloliquefaciens. It's another member of the Bacillus. Actually, this one now, if you go in and look at it, they've broken it down and they call it the BAA group, Bacillus amyloliquefaciens group, and now they have several subspecies of that. But I'm going to stick with this one, especially since it's so hard to pronounce. But this is a group of Bacillus organisms that's also out there. They're available. They grow on the primary roots and along the root surfaces. Once again, they are colonizing the roots. And by doing that, they're blocking the growth of pathogens on the roots. They produce compounds that stimulate the plant growth and are taken up by the roots. So they're actually in there as they're growing and doing their thing. They're feeding the roots and feeding the plant. This one also solubilizes soil phosphorus and enhances nitrogen fixation. These also, the BAA group, activates the plant's own resistance system, so induce systemic resistance again. The mode of action, they have several mechanisms, and this is the one I was talking about earlier. It also produces siderophores, so iron, which is necessary for growth. Usually our soils have enough iron, but it is a micronutrient, so it's not going to be there in large amounts. So if the BAA group is sequestering those iron molecules, making them available to the plant, they're less available to the microbes and more available to the plant. So the plant is healthier, the microbes are less healthy. The BAA group, many of them produce antibiotics, they produce other compounds that inhibit the germination of fungal spores. So those resting stages of the pathogens in the soil and on the ones that land on the plant leaves, when they start to germinate, well, BAA is producing something that keeps them from germinating. And so, once again, they're inhibiting growth of the pathogens. They actually produce, again, enzymes like the chitinases that break down fungal cell walls. And these are some of the soil-borne pathogens that have been shown to be suppressed by the BAA group. Fusarium, Pythium, Rhizoctonia, Phytophthora, Verticillium, foliar pests that are suppressed by BAA application, rust, powdery mildew, downy mildew, Botrytis cinerea, alternaria species, and bacterial pathogens that it's effective against: Pseudomonas syringae, Pathobar tomato, different xanthomonads, the Xanthomonas species, and it's actually registered in Canada to be used against fire blight. I'm not sure it's registered in the U.S. yet. I couldn't find where it was, but in Canada it is registered as a preventive measure to control fire blight. These are some of the BAA products that are available. You see quite a few names. Some of them you may recognize. And these use the different strains of BAA that have been isolated, and a list of pathogens that in the lab and in the field have been shown to be controlled or suppressed by the BAA group of bacteria. This is the list. I put these squares next to one that some of you probably recognize or are at least familiar with. Some of them, apple ring rot, that's one we don't see very much. Fusarium fujikuri, maybe not, but I know Rhizoctonia solani, the Clavibacter michiganensis, if you grow potatoes, you've heard of that one. Anthracnose diseases, powdery mildew diseases, Verticillium dallii, Xanthomonas oryzae, Sclerotinia sclerotiorum. That's a real tough guy, but BAA suppresses it. Bacterial wilt and early blight diseases, Fusarium head blight disease, Alternaria brassicae. That one's one that some of you may be familiar with. And the Coronispora leaf spot diseases. So probably everyone recognizes at least one of those with a square next to it. BAA is effective against those. You can use something other than the chemical pesticides. And you may think, okay, that's a great idea. How hard are these things to get? What's it going to cost? Well, one thing is the cost. You can always, if you're doing it as a commercial business, you're using something environmentally friendly. It doesn't affect pollinators. Has been shown to be effective. So you got a good selling point for using a lot of these with your clients. So you can actually even charge a little more sometimes, whether it costs you more or not, because you're being so environmentally friendly. And that's something that we all want to do. I'm not saying it's just a business trick, but we all want to move in that direction. Do as little harm as possible. That's the whole idea of PM anyway. So I got this for you. These are the products that I had pictures of on the presentation. And just myself quickly, I checked and I could buy all of these products. I could easily get them. I could get them online. I could get them, a lot of them at garden centers. I can have them mailed directly to my house if I want. And as a homeowner, this is what I would pay. Now, if you're in the business, you're going to get a discount from wherever you get your stuff from, so it's not going to cost you that much. But I wanted you to see all of those products that I talked about, Bacillus thuringiensis and all those groups, the Bacillus subtilis product, that's the one right there, cease, and the BAA group, some of those are on here, the Monterey Complete Disease Control, Southern Ag Garden Friendly Fungicide, those are BAA, Revitalize, Arbor, Double Nickel, those are all BAA products. And this is what, as a homeowner, this is what it would cost me. And these are very effective, so you can see they are available, you can get them, and you can use them. So with that, I'm going to end it and open it up for any questions. Yeah.
Have you seen any landscapers have good, promising results with using this in applications for preventative and also for post-treatment, and as far as the commercial scale goes?
I've seen them using the BTs a lot, more than the others. And they use those and they've been very effective on a commercial scale.
I was just wondering, is a pesticide applicator's license required to use biological products?
Most of these I have up there, you don't need a pesticide license to apply. They do have an EPA registration number, of course, and now some of that also comes to, like I said, if I were a homeowner, I could get these and apply them. Some of them, but in most cases, you do need the applicator's license if you're doing it on a commercial basis, no matter what you're applying as a pesticide. If it's an EPA registered pesticide. Yeah.
I'm trying to decide which pesticide to apply, targeting which pathogen It sounded like to me the BTs were primarily for insects and that perhaps the other two were more for your fungus and bacteria, that's
Yes,
correct?
that's correct. Yeah.
Could you read that?
And that, I think that's why those have been, not have gained as much popularity, even though they haven't been around as long, is, they are more suppressive and used, a lot of times you'll see recommendations for some of these, it's when conditions are favorable for the pathogen, and you know it's in the area, and they're favorable for the disease, then you wanna use these to apply as a preventative to make sure you don't get the disease.
And so then my follow-up would be, how specific, how essential is it to fully diagnose which pathogen you're specifically dealing with before trying to purchase the product you want to use? Or are they more of a general, preventative?
A lot of them, with the disease prevention are more general, as I showed with that little blurb from the cease label. The cease is the Bacillus subtilis one, and if you go through and look on the label itself, actually, it's a very broad spectrum of fungi that it controls, and it's because of the mode of action. The direct mode and the indirect mode both. It's growing and helping the plant to be resistant. It's out-competing the pathogens for the nutrients that it needs, and it's also producing things like if you're producing chitinase, most fungi have chitin in their cell wall. So the chitinase is going to be effective against any fungus. It's going to start to digest the cell wall. So that's why, because of their mode of action, they are very more general in disease control than the BT is for insect control.
This is a broad question because there are a lot of products out there, but are most of the ones that are not insect oriented like soil treatments, or is it like a mix of foliar and root?
Well, it's a mix. Cease, that one can be used as a soil drench or sprayed, mixed and sprayed on. Revitalize, that was the one with the BAA group. That one is usually used sprayed on the plant, so it's a mixture. Yeah.
I was wondering if, when you're doing the application, if temperature comes into it, like it has to be below 85 degrees in order to apply or release storage, it's in the outside.
The active ingredients themselves, they can be effective on really high temperatures, but in a lot of cases, it's the inert ingredients that are giving us problems whenever we go to the higher temperatures. Now on the labels, most of these, I didn't see any warnings about applying at high temperatures.
Dr. Joe, has there been any research on the BTs that you talked about, the surrender root system on the Biopesticides root rot, or say the boxwood dieback? Has any research been done that it's preventative, or do we know, are they working on something like that?
I haven't, because the boxwood dieback is pretty recent. I haven't seen anybody doing any research on that, but they have done research on Phytophthora and Phytophthora root rots, and they do show suppression of disease when used against those pathogens, the Phytophthora pathogen.
But that would be upon installation, say you were putting it in your garden, and you would want to go ahead and do it as a preventative when you install, and then do it on a regimen, like, would be like every 3 months, 6 months, a year? How does that work?
Well, a lot of these, because they are living organisms, once they inhabit the root system, they're kind of like mycorrhizae. Once they're there, as the roots grow, the mycorrhizae kind of grows and stays with it, unless something environmentally catastrophic happens catastrophic essentially to the mycorrhiza. Well, the root inhabiting bacillus are the same way. They are growing and reproducing, so as the roots grow, they're kind of growing and staying along with it. So, they should be, I don't think the company's selling that way, obviously, but they should be, you put it on, and it's gonna last a long time if it get good inhabiting of the root system. Because it is growing, it's a living organism, growing just as the plant's roots grow.
So with the BTs specifically, if you were trying to target a hornworm or something on the tomato, would you also be affecting caterpillars for butterflies in another portion of the garden, or is it because caterpillars are mostly plant specific? Is that why it's more of a targeted chemical?
Well, say the tomato hornworm is what you're after, you're gonna be spraying tomatoes. You're going to be killing any lepidopteran, almost any lepidopteran caterpillar that eats the tomato leaves. Now, we don't have any, can be correct me if I'm wrong, we don't have any butterflies, that the tomato is its host plant and only, the tomato. So, you're not gonna be killing butterfly caterpillars, because they're not gonna be eating your tomato. Now, if you spray it on, your milkweed plant, yeah, you're gonna kill those caterpillars. But you wouldn't be spraying on your milkweed because most people are growing it for the caterpillars, and so they don't care if it's getting eaten.
You have to watch your drift though, you know, especially
Yeah.
with the powders.
Yeah, that's yeah. Drift would be a problem. If you're spraying tomatoes near your milkweed and the wind's blowing, you'll be
And
getting.
but you're also saying that it can get in the soil, or the BT's not?
The BT, no, it's soil inhabiting in the wild, but, as a pest control, it's when you're spraying it on the leaves and the insects eating the leaves. It's not going to.
Because it's back